As far as superheroes go, Invincible has to be one of the strongest, if not most durable heroes that we've ever seen on TV. Because in no particular order, this guy's been stabbed, shot, electrocuted, and he nearly gets beaten to death in every season. And based off the random YouTube shorts that I get in my algorithm, we have yet to see the worst thing that's happened to him on screen.
After their brutal battle in a sun, where Mark ripped his throat out with his teeth before leaving him to burn on the surface of the sun.
So it is safe to say that he lives up to his name. And throughout his many battles and brushes with death, he's remained a hero for better or worse. Because although he is half alien of a superpowered warrior race, his other half is human. And it also helps that he didn't get his powers until he was basically an adult. So he was raised with the understanding that human life is sacred and killing is wrong. Which really made it hard for his dad to bring him on board with the whole viltrumite planetary takeover. But what if Mark got his powers when he was a lot younger and way easier to manipulate? How would the world of Invincible change if that happened? Because, a superpowered toddler, what's the worst that can happen? But before we get started, if you could leave a like on this video to support the channel, I'd appreciate it. Now, let's talk about... During a Little League baseball game, Nolan and Debbie watches from the sidelines as Mark is up to bat. And when the first pitch is thrown, the umpire yells, "Strike one!" But when Debbie sees Nolan standing away from the crowd of spectators, she goes over to remind him of what life is like for kids and explains what humanity is all about. But it would seem that Nolan is just bored with the whole thing. And that's when the umpire yells out, "Strike two!" And as they continue to watch the game, Nolan just doesn't seem to understand the point of being there when he can literally be doing anything else. But when the final pitch is thrown, Mark is able to swing the bat and hitting a home run that sends the ball far above the clouds and nearly hitting a plane out the sky. And while the crowd cheers on Mark as he circles the bases, Nolan seems to be the happiest, especially now knowing that his son finally has his powers. And from that moment on, he begins to teach and train Mark in the viltrumite ways, from taking him out to empty fields where he can test his strength, to wide-range deserts where he can learn to fly. And at that time, Mark couldn't be more than 8 years old, but he's able to learn all the basics fairly quickly. And even though Debbie has some apprehension about him training at such a young age, her and Nolan would come to an agreement where as long as he does well in school and keeps his powers a secret, they can continue to train. Because all she wants is to make sure that Mark has a chance at a normal childhood before growing up and inevitably following in his father's footsteps. And with them having an understanding about their child's future, Mark's training as well as the schoolwork remains consistent as well as his secret being closely guarded. But little would anyone know, just across the street, they would be monitored by Cecil and the rest of the GDA who found out about Mark's powers during the baseball game. Because when a plane is nearly knocked out of the sky, that kind of activity is something that gets on their radar. And with Cecil already suspicious of Nolan, who also just so happens to be the most powerful person on the planet, the last thing that he would want is another variable that he can't control. So for the next few years, they would keep an eye on Mark and let Nolan believe that he's the only super person in that family. And as the time passes, things are relatively quiet. But when Mark turns 12 years old, he and his best friend William would have a sleepover at his house. And with him still just being a kid, he would want to show off what he can do to somebody other than his parents. So when all the adults are asleep in the house, the two boys sneak out in the backyard and Mark shows William that he can fly. But wanting to do more than just levitate in the backyard, he takes William on a flight around the city. And at first, things are pretty chill with the two young boys. But when Mark says, "Watch this," he starts to fly faster and higher than anything that William's ever experienced. And it would cause him to get lightheaded, and only after a few more seconds, William passes out and slips out of Mark's hands. And when he tries to catch him before hitting the ground, William's body is just falling too chaotically for Mark to get a hold of. And within the blink of an eye, William splatters all over a rooftop of an abandoned warehouse, turning him into nothing more than a puddle of blood. And as Mark kneels down literally covered in William's remains, he would start to cry at what he's just done to his friend. But only after a few more minutes, Cecil would teleport in to comfort Mark and also telling him who he is. And Cecil basically tells him that he knows what he can do, who his father really is, and that everything is gonna be okay. And when suggesting that Mark come with him back to the GDA, a flash of red and white quickly appears on the rooftop showing a very pissed off Omni Man, and he demands to know what Cecil's doing with his son. And he tells him in a calm demeanor, "I was just cleaning up your kid's mess, and you're welcome by the way." And seeing the blood on the ground, as well as Mark who is still crying, Omni-Man would hear Cecil out. And after explaining what Mark's done, him and Cecil would make a deal that they'll cover up William's death and keep Mark's powers a secret in exchange for having direct communication with the GDA in case he's needed. And that would mean him temporarily being a member of the Guardians of the Globe. And even though Omni-Man doesn't like to answer to anyone, for the sake of his son, as well as the deal that he made with Debbie, he agrees to these terms, at least until Mark gets a little older. And before Omni-Man and Mark flies away, he tells Cecil not to tell Debbie what happened. Ever. To which Cecil nods slowly in agreement. And when flying back home, Omni-Man sees that Mark is still sad, and he tells him that what he did is perfectly normal and he shouldn't feel bad about it. And he lets him know that being a viltrumite makes him superior to humans on Earth, and as weak and as fragile as they are, he can think of them like bugs, with him asking, "Son, do you ever feel bad when you step on an ant or a spider?" And Mark says while wiping his tears, "No." Exactly. That's because in the grand scheme of things, their lives don't really matter, and if you didn't kill them, somebody else would have done it eventually. Omni-Man explains, and throughout this explanation, Mark would start to understand, and by the time they make it home, he wouldn't seem all that bothered by what happened. But, just like he told Cecil, Nolan tells Mark, "Now son, remember how you're supposed to keep your powers a secret, and you've done a really good job with that so far? Well, I need you to do the same thing when it comes to William and not tell your mother. And that'll be our little secret, okay?" And Mark agrees, and he would ask, "Dad, do you think you can teach me how to fly better? I just want to be like you." And Nolan would say with a smile, "Of course, son, don't worry. You'll get it. Trust me. But go get yourself cleaned up and get some sleep. You have school tomorrow." A few years go by, and Mark is now in his final year of high school, and by this time, he has a way better handle on his powers. So much so that he actually has been fighting crime in secret with a homemade costume. And the same day that he graduates, his dad would take him to see art where he can get an official superhero uniform. So while a montage of him trying on different suits is happening, the Guardians are called to deal with Omnipotence on the other side of the world. And although Cecil is calling Nolan for his help with this matter, he takes his earpiece out and crushes it. Because, with Mark now of age, he doesn't feel that he owes him anything anymore. And when Mark finally has a suit that he actually likes, he gives himself the superhero name, and him and Omni-Man would go out flying. But when looking for a crime to stop in the city, things take a turn when a portal opens up and out comes an army of Flaxans. And while Mark wants to jump straight into the action, Omni-Man tells him to just wait for a moment, and he tells Mark that he wants him to have a true hero's entrance. So just wait a moment. And as the Flaxans unleash all kinds of havoc in the city, the father-son duo would just be watching the chaos. But when the teen team shows up to save the day, they are quickly overwhelmed by the sheer number of Flaxans coming through the portal, and one by one, from Rexplode, Duplicate, and even Robot, they would all be slaughtered. And right before a killing blow is dealt to Adam Eve, both Invincible and Omni-Man swoop in and would completely decimate the Flaxan army with very little effort, and forcing them to retreat. And while Invincible is checking on Adam Eve to make sure that she's okay, Omni-Man flies directly into the portal before it closes up. And as he's literally tearing through the Flaxan homeworld, Mark would be cheered on by a crowd who sees him as a hero who stopped an alien invasion. But while enjoying his time in the spotlight, Cecil teleports in. And after some GDA agents bring Adam Eve to a medical unit, Cecil confronts Mark by saying, "Nice suit, but while you were playing dress up, 3 city blocks were destroyed and countless civilians were killed. But all this could have been prevented if you and your dad just came when I called you." And Mark looks around at all the carnage and he says to Cecil, "So, you really like the suit?" And that completely throws Cecil off. But Mark quickly says, I'm kidding. I know we didn't come on time, but we stopped these aliens from destroying the city. And my dad's probably making sure that they don't ever come back. So, I don't really see what the big deal is." And to get Mark to understand the gravity of the situation, Cecil tells him, "The big deal is, Mark, that people are dead, and I blame you and your dad for it. Now, if you're gonna call yourself a hero, how about you start acting like one, or just do me a favor and get the fuck off my planet?" And as Cecil turns to a crumbling building, he tells him, "How about for a start, you help clean up this mess?" He says referring to the city, but Mark, not taking him seriously, would slowly start to fly away, and he tells Cecil, "I would help, but I'm really hungry from saving the day, so I'm just gonna eat. And besides, if I save the city, I think you can find someone else to clean this place up." And before Cecil can say anything in response, Mark flies off. And while he looks at the young hero in the distance, Donald calls him over his earpiece and tells him, "Sir, you do know that Invincible and Omni-Man were watching from the very beginning of the invasion and could have prevented this?" And Cecil says, "I know, Donald. I think it's time to start looking into contingencies for our father-son duo." Later on that night, Nolan returns from the Flaxan homeworld, And after getting himself cleaned up, Mark tells him what Cecil told him. And as they laugh about it, Nolan tells Mark, "Well, with all that being said, I think it's almost time for your last lesson. But don't worry, I'll help you out with this one. So go get some rest and I'll see you in the morning." And as Mark goes to his room, Nolan peeks outside to a random house across the street and he narrows his eyes with a knowing look. But only after a few seconds, he then heads upstairs to go to bed as well. But around 2 in the morning, Nolan wakes up Mark and the two go out for a late night flight. And on their way, Nolan explains how the Guardians are the only thing standing in their way from Earth joining the Viltrumite Empire. And once they're gone, they can rule the planet as father and son. Something that Nolan has been training Mark for since the day that he got his powers. And with him fully on board with the Viltrumite mission, a distress call is sent for the Guardians to meet up at the headquarters. And once they all arrive, they question who made the call. But in the middle of all the questioning, Omni-Man comes in and he quickly takes out Red Rush and Green Ghost. But when Martian Man wraps his body around Nolan, Warrior Woman and the Immortal begin beating up on him. And that's when Mark comes in breaking up the fight and giving his dad a chance to kill Martian Man easily. But when Warrior Woman tries to hit him with her mace, Omni-Man is able to grab her by the head and break her neck. And thinking that he has the element of surprise, Darkwing would try to stop Mark by jumping from the ceiling, but he's quickly caught by the leg and slammed to the ground, leaving Aquarius and the Immortal as the last two Guardians. But that number drops to 1 when Warrior Woman's mace is used to bash in Aquarius' head with one swing from Omni-Man. And as his body falls to the feet of the Immortal, he rushes at Mark and flies him through the building and out into the open sky. And as they continue to trade blows, Mark just seems to laugh at his punches, which only gets the Immortal more upset. But before he can land another punch, Omni-Man comes in and quickly decapitates him. And to ensure that he doesn't come back, he crushes his head with his bare hands. And only within the span of 10 minutes, Earth's mightiest heroes are all dead. And as they both start to catch their breath, Mark says jokingly, "Phew, that was easier than I thought. So, what's next, Dad?" And Omni-Man says, "Well, I don't know about you, son, but I could eat. What do you say, Chinese in China?" And Mark says, getting a head start, "Race you there." And as they fly away, they treat the slaughter of the Guardians like it was just another day. But watching from one of the nearby drones at the Guardians' headquarters would be Cecil. And after witnessing such a bloodbath, the only card that he would have left to play is to use Debbie as a way to try to reason with Mark. So after teleporting in and bringing her back to the GDA, he shows her the footage of what her husband and son did to the Guardians. Then he tells her what Mark did to William when he was 12 years old. And this news nearly breaks her because seeing what her own son has become, she really thought that he had a chance of being normal. But it's clear that with a man like Nolan in their lives, that was just impossible. And Cecil tells her that she's the only one that can maybe talk some sense into Mark and get him to join their side. But she tells him, "So what, you think that I can convince Mark to go against Nolan when they both clearly have no problem killing people?" And Cecil says, "That's our only hope at this point, Debbie. Just until we can find something to stop a Viltrumite." And she snaps back at him saying, "Well, Cecil, that maybe could have worked if you not told a 12-year-old boy that killing was just no big deal." Then she takes a deep breath and says, "I'll try, but in case you don't know, the lives of everyone that they killed are on your hands. Now, bring me home." And before Debbie is teleported back to her house, Cecil says to her, "Yeah, I know." And when she gets back home, Cecil tells Donald, "Be ready, Donald, for anything." And while inside the house from across the street, Donald says while looking at cameras, "Yes, sir." After returning from a big meal from killing the Guardians of the Globe, both Omni-Man and Invincible are still covered in blood. And as they walk inside their home, they're still joking about the way they killed the other heroes. But when they see Debbie, who's been waiting for them at the kitchen table, she sees their blood-soaked uniforms and would question Mark about whose blood he has on them. But Nolan steps in and tries to change the subject by asking, what is she doing up so late? But Debbie doesn't waver in her questioning and would stand firm and demand answers. But neither of them would take her seriously. And when Mark goes to walk past her, she grabs him by the shoulder, then questions him again. And as a reflex from being grabbed, he would push Debbie off him. But what he thought was just a little shove turned out to be him pushing her through a wall and leaving her body broken against a fireplace. And when seeing what he's done to his mom, he rushes over and would start to apologize to her. But as Nolan looks on, he notices something happening from across the street. And before he can react, the house that everyone is standing in would suddenly explode, killing Debbie and leaving Nolan and Mark surrounded by flames. And watching from the surveillance cameras across the road, Donald and a handful of GDA agents are trying to leave. And as Cecil is asking for a status report, Omni-Man would burst through the walls of the house, and he would get even angrier knowing that he was being spied on. And while Donald tries to distract him to let the other agents leave, when Omni-Man gets a hold of him, he hits the self-destruct button on the house, killing himself in the hopes of at least slowing down the Viltrumite. And with Mark still processing the fact that his mom is dead, Omni-Man tells him that Cecil was the one who was up to this, and he holds up Donald's glasses. And now knowing who it is to blame for what just happened, in a matter of seconds, Mark comes to the GDA and rips through hundreds of Reanimen until he gets to Cecil. And once he has his eyes on him, he grabs him by the throat and squeezes until there's a snap, effectively killing him. And as Omni-Man meets up with Mark, the father and son duo hover in the sky watching the Pentagon burn. And when seeing a random ship enter Earth's atmosphere, he says to his son, "It's time, Mark," letting him know that the Earth is now part of the Viltrumite Empire. But back over in the ruins of the GDA, in one of the private hospital units, Adam Eve, who is still in a coma from the Flaxan invasion, would have a green portal surrounding her. And suddenly, she's teleported somewhere else. And when she's in a safe place, we see Robot in his human form and Angstrom Levy watching her, and he would say, "She may be our last hope." And as the camera zooms out, we see a small resistance filled with multiverse versions of Mark, who they believe is strong enough to take on Invincible and Omni-Man. Hey everybody, and thank you so much for watching. And if you did enjoy this video, you're in luck, because I just might be starting my own Invincible universe that would likely span 3 or 4 videos to wrap up this story. And I will admit that I did play this one safe with all the twists and turns that you'd probably expect, but I guarantee that going forward, I have a lot of surprises that nobody will see coming. So I hope you guys enjoy the ride. And I do plan on doing side stories here and there just to flesh out the universe, like what if Powerplex killed Invincible, or what if Conquest ripped Oliver in half, or my personal favorite, what if the Guardians of the Globe killed Omni-Man? But that's just me. But now I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of this story? Did you like it? Is there anything that you'd change? And what's the next story that you'd like for me to cover? Whatever it is, let me know down below in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. And if you want access to videos early, like to be a part of the Heisenverse Discord, and have your name immortalized at the end of every video, consider becoming a member of the channel. But if not, that's perfectly fine. You do enough by just watching and leaving a like. So regardless, I appreciate you and I'll catch you in the next video. My name's Merge. Later.